There's four good reasons not to support a graduated income tax or a progressive tax. First is a financial problem. Second, there's a jobs problem with that tax. Third, there's a political or a trust problem. And fourth, there's an equity or a fairness problem. So let's talk about what those four mean. Financial problem. Let's say you've got a son and a daughter-in-law, and they're just getting started, and you've been helping them and giving them $20,000 a year to kind of supplement their income. They've just gone out and bought a big house, and they've got two leased cars, a Volvo and a BMW, and they've maxed out their credit cards, and they just announced to you they bought a pair of snowmobiles so they could enjoy the winter. Now your son comes to you and says, could you just kind of increase the help you're giving me from 20,000 to 35,000 and we'll be okay? What would you say? What would you expect? You'd maybe demand a budget, ask for a spending plan, ask them to kind of talk through how they're going to change their priorities. Now, you love them and you want to help them. We all love the state of Illinois and we want the state of Illinois to do well. But giving our son and the daughter-in-law more money without a plan is no better than giving the state of Illinois an increase in the income tax flexibility without a plan to manage their spending. So there's a financial problem with granting this constitutional amendment before the legislature and the governor take seriously their financial problems. The proceeds they're estimating if they adopt what they've promised to adopt would be about 3.2 to 3.3 billion new dollars taken out of people's pockets and given to Springfield to spend. Their current structural deficit just for this fiscal year is over 5 billion. So if they kept
before the COVID
before
disaster.
the COVID.
Right.
So if they kept their promise, okay, and I'm not sure they can or will, if they kept their promise, this would be like giving your son and the daughter-in-law 12 grand more and saying, good luck. If they've maxed out their credit cards, if they don't change their spending habits, if they won't show you a plan, giving them more money is not compassionate. So even those people who make too much money and think they should give more money to state government, if you want to, write them a check and mail it to the Treasury. But don't force this on the state of Illinois. So you got a financial problem. Second problem is you got a jobs problem. We talked about it a little earlier, but more than 1 million Illinois families depend on a competitive job. A job where the company they work for or the work they do is competitive with other states or worldwide. So if you raise the tax burden on those kind of companies and those kind of jobs, they're going to lose some orders. They're going to lose some jobs. They're going to lose some customers. And as they do, they're not going to need as much workforce or they're not going to be able to afford as much workforce. Every job we lose pays zero Illinois income tax. So you need to be very, very careful with your tax policy that it doesn't put your job creators, your job producers, your competitive workers at a disadvantage with other states. We already know Illinois has high property taxes. We already know Illinois is close to leading the nation in sales tax. And we have a pretty robust current flat income tax of 5%. With this graduated income tax, which would affect small businesses, family farms, it will affect small manufacturers and small retailers, we could lose thousands of jobs from the economic disruption, and none of those jobs will pay any taxes. Yeah, the best and brightest in Eastern Europe, the best and brightest in the Far East, the best and brightest in Australia, New Zealand, the best in Europe. So that's part of why we have such a robust, strong economy in the United States is because we're very competitive. So
just a few cents.
Right, tenths of a cent, hundredths of a cent when you're making 10,000 an hour of a product. So particularly Illinois manufacturers are in a tough spot. They already carry a higher workman's compensation, a higher unemployment, higher property tax, and a higher sales tax than all of the surrounding states. If you add income tax as an additional burden, I'm afraid we're going to lose jobs, we're going to lose companies. No, absolutely it's not a good time. And I wish the governor and the legislature would have kind of faced up to, they ordered the closure and the shelter in place, and they supported the governor shutting down the economy and putting 1 million Illinois families into the unemployment system. So if anybody ought to understand the effects and implications of what they did, they should. This is not the time to to further stress small employers and job seekers and people hanging on to their jobs with a potential tax increase, which could cause people to rethink what they're doing and whether they're going to stay in the state of Illinois. It's political trust. I mean, the last three times that the General Assembly raised the income tax rate, they made pretty broad promises that they were going to pay off their deficit, they were going to work on their unpaid bills, that they were going to stop spending more than they took in. I mean, big long speeches on the floor, lots of chest beating. Three governors in a row promised that they would rein in state spending and begin to live like the rest of us do inside of their resources. Well, three tax increases later, within a year after each one of them, they were back in the same mess. Whether you're talking about the Illinois lottery going to fund education, or the toll roads are going to become freeways, or the river boats were not about casinos, they were really about redeveloping tourism and river towns, or the fact that medical marijuana was just just for people who needed it for pain, and now recreational isn't about money at all. I mean, how many broken fibs are we going to accept? So until we can develop some trust, until the leadership down there takes the voters seriously and takes the taxpayers seriously, I don't think we should trust them with an unfettered ability to choose each year who to tax and how much to tax them. People talk about redistricting being abused, and political leaders down in Springfield allowing legislators to pick their voters because they control the districting. This is going to let the majority leader in the House and the Senate and the governor essentially pick who's going to pay the income tax. They can pick and choose by changing the brackets and changing the tax rates. So, it's a very dangerous tool in the hands of people who have not demonstrated a lot of political honesty with us. And until they're willing to reform themselves, we should not give up our constitutional protection of a flat tax. Clearly, Illinoisans want term limits. Clearly, Illinoisans want reform and redistricting. Clearly, Illinoisans want the legislature to be more proactive and more honest. Clearly, the people of Illinois are not happy with the governor and his kind of team of experts making all the decisions on the future of 13 million people. And we're offered none of these reforms, okay, in exchange for more of our wealth, for more of our income. I mean, basically, it's sit down, shut up, and pay us more taxes. And we need to say no. Until they believe we'll say no, you're not going to get change out of Springfield. Mike Madigan never had any intention of delivering on the promises he's made. I mean, people ought to recognize that by now. Mike Madigan was at the 1970 Constitutional Convention as a delegate. Mike Madigan knows why there's a flat tax in the state of Illinois. Mike Madigan was around when they said these would be toll roads, and when we paid off the bonds, we will make them freeways. Mike Madigan was around when they promised to dedicate all of the funding from the lottery to education. I mean, Mike Madigan knows these promises have been made and are being broken, and Mike Madigan doesn't care. Yeah, the equity problem. I mean, as I said earlier, and we'll say flat rate, fair, clear, honest, transparent taxes are accepted. People want, if you've got a house that's twice the size of mine, I'm not bothered if you pay twice as much taxes. If the guy on the other side of me has got a house half the size of mine, it doesn't bother me there's a proportionality, there's a fairness, there's a clearness about it. We today have a flat rate income tax, and it is progressive. A family making $20,000 gets a $4,000 personal exemption, so they're taxed on $16,000, or they pay about $800 in Illinois taxes. Now they get to use all the roads and all the services of state government, all the support and whatever else they need. Now, a family earning $200,000, a husband and wife, both professional, working long hours, paying for a daycare and whatever else they pay for, they pay $9,800 or 12 times more in taxes than the family that makes $20,000. So the system's already progressive. The people earning more pay substantially more in taxes Now that's with a flat rate. If you use a graduated rate, that family at 200,000 would be paying 25 times as much in taxes as the other family.
Or whatever they decided.
Or whatever they
the
decide
rate
each,
they
right?
wanted it to be.
And that's not fair, and that's not right, and that's not what anybody intended. And we shouldn't let people confuse us and say that the flat tax is unfair or it's regressive. It's not regressive. It's clearly progressive. And they talk about wanting to tax less for they anytime they want, they can raise the personal exemption. I mean, they can adjust the current system to be more generous to people who earn less. They could raise the personal exemption to 8,000 per person, which would mean the family at 20,000 would be only paying taxes on $4,000 instead of. I mean, they can make this more progressive and make it hurt less for people earning less anytime they want. They haven't changed the personal exemption any time in the last 10 years. So, their talk of progressive is only important when it comes to them getting more revenue. This is not about tax relief or compassion. This is about an addiction to spending. They can move their tax home in about 90 days. And that's what's happened in other states where they've tried a millionaire tax or an unfair tax. If people perceive it as fair, they will pay their fair share. Americans are very compliant. I mean, we stop at stop signs not because we're afraid we're going to be arrested if we run a stop sign. It's part of the social contract. It's part of an agreement we all have with each other. We are the most generous people in the world. We give more to charity than any other society on earth. So this is not about fairness or people doing their fair share or contributing. This is about people twisting the argument, okay, using envy and focusing hatred on people who are more successful. Now, that a guy earning $1 million is paying over $50,000 in Illinois income tax and is probably consuming close to zero state services. He's paying his fair share. Now, if you want to raise the tax rate, raise the tax rate. But don't single him out and punish him, because that guy who earns $1 million can very easily fly down to Houston or to Dallas and go find himself an apartment down there, move his voting address and his voter registration, and become a resident of Texas. And that's what's happened. I mean, people, if they believe they're not being treated fairly, okay, don't stay and let state government punish them. They move. Financial problem, a job problem, trust, okay, and what's fair. I mean, those are if we just focus on, they won't make any of these arguments. All they're going to try to talk about is equity and fairness, okay? And they're not going to explain it to you. They're going to tell you somehow you should envy other people and we should take other people's money. Don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the man behind the tree. It goes all the way back to John Adams. Those are not fair tax systems. They don't have high compliance. This is not good for the state of Illinois. And it just delays, like our son and daughter-in-law with the spending problem. It delays the day of reckoning when we can force the legislature and the governor to kind of own up to the structure they have and clean it up. Then if we need a tax increase, a lot of people would be willing to pay a tax increase to fix the state of Illinois. But we don't want to go out and buy an alcoholic another 12-pack.